Hey, Nick, it's Tom Costello at NBC News in Washington. How do you hear me?
I've got you loud and clear, Tom.
All right. Are you ready to do this?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. Listen, you're nice to take a moment. Thanks so much. I guess we'll just jump right in. We all watched and held our breaths last week, and all of a sudden, something didn't go quite right. Give us the perspective inside the rocket. What was happening? What did you feel? What were you thinking?
Yeah, absolutely. It didn't go quite right. It seems to be a little bit of an understatement. The first 2 minutes of the launch were going great. Everything was nominal, and it was right after the first staging when the booster started to separate inside. It went from normal to something was wrong pretty quick. The automated system pulled us away from the rocket so fast, and so the first thing I really noticed was being shaken fairly violently side to side as that safety system pulled us away from the rocket. And then there was an alarm inside the capsule and a light that was up there, and I knew once I saw that light that we had an emergency with the booster, that at that point we weren't going to make it to orbit that day. So the mission changed to getting back down on the ground as safely as we could.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, Nick, yes, you are an astronaut. Yes, you are an Air Force veteran. You guys are cool, calm, and collected. But at the same time, that must have been terrifying. What was going through your head at that very moment, knowing you're on the edge of space and you just had a rocket failure?
So training really takes over. We spend a lot of time over in Star City with the folks there at the Cosmonaut Training Center, training for every scenario that they can think of, and this is one of those. So we had an opportunity to practice responding to something like this. Your training takes over, and you realize that the thing that you can do to help yourself the most is to stay calm and execute the procedures as a team. Alexei and I working together and trying to manage the situation as best as we can. You don't develop those skills overnight. You mentioned I've served in the Air Force, and so I've been working on developing these skills for years. It goes all the way back to my time in test pilot school. This is not the first in-flight emergency that I've been a part of.
That said, when you're in there's a reason they call it a ballistic descent, right?
Absolutely.
This is not a typical emergency landing for a 737. So what in the world was that like?
Everything was new for me. It was my first time. I have to give kudos to my commander, Alexei Ovchinin. He's a seasoned veteran cosmonaut, and as we were going through this, he was able to tell me, what was normal, what was not normal. Obviously, a ballistic descent, we come up and we're coming back down in a fairly steep trajectory, and to lose all of that energy, it all ends up being absorbed as wind resistance and G. And so the G's built up pretty fast. Luckily, that we didn't have the 6 to 7 G's for very long. It was only a handful of seconds, and then things were back down to normal. From that point, after that peak of G, it's a normal Soyuz landing, and so everything went nominal from that point on.
But you didn't really know where you were going to land, right? Yeah, I mean, you could have, you knew maybe you'd land in Kazakhstan. You could have landed in China, for that matter. What were you thinking when you were coming back down to Earth, and you're just wondering, where are we going to end up?
Well, I have to tell you, my eyes were looking out the window trying to gauge exactly where we were going to be. Were we going to end up landing in water? Were we going to be on the steppes of Kazakhstan? Did we make it far enough downrange that we were in more hilly or mountainous terrain? So we were, I was looking outside and trying to give my best estimate of where we were going to come down. And luckily for us, it was smooth, flat terrain, and it ended up working out as a pretty smooth landing.
So, Nick, yes, you're an Air Force vet, and yes, you're a pilot, but this was your first trip into space. And I'm just wondering, what goes through your head? I would imagine a little bit of humor has to creep in there, but also, reality. This is still a very dangerous business.
Yeah, I imagined that my first trip to outer space was going to be a memorable one. I didn't expect it to be quite this memorable. But yeah, what we do is hard. And it's not something that I think you can state enough. What do we mean when we say space is hard? Human exploration of space is hard. There's risk, and we do everything we can to mitigate that risk. But there's always some risk there. the designers, the engineers, the people that build these spacecraft, they're constantly trying to make the perfect spacecraft. But it can't be perfect all the time. So we have contingencies in place, and we have other fail-safe systems. And this was just a great example of those fail-safe systems stepping in and doing their job. We hadn't had to use those on the Soyuz in 35 years, and it was still ready to go when it was needed. And so for that, I'm very thankful for all those people that invested so much in making sure that those fail-safe systems are in place.
So you land in Kazakhstan. The Russian military and rescue teams get to you relatively quickly, and then I would imagine, listen, I have a wife and I have kids and I have parents. I'm just wondering, what was their reaction when they saw you? I would imagine there had to be some emotion.
Oh, absolutely. Being reunited with the family after that was, it's, the feelings, everything that that the training lets you kind of put to the side and focus on the mission at hand, all that starts to well up. And so being able to finally hold my wife in my arms and give her a hug was just enormous. And, it made me feel like, okay, yeah, I'm finally back and safe. Funny story, we're sitting there next to the capsule after we've landed, and we're trying to make all the phone calls on our satellite phone that we're supposed to make, and then after that we start trying to get in touch with loved ones. So after Alexei was able to speak with his wife, I called mine, and unfortunately it went to voicemail. So now she has she's got a voicemail that she can keep as a memento for the rest of her life.
What did you tell her in the voicemail?
I told her I'm fine. And it was a one wild ride.
Yeah. Will you do it again? I guess we're done, Nick. My window's ended, and I don't want to step on somebody else. Last question: are you going to go again?
Absolutely. I'm ready to fly.
You were terrific. Thank you for taking a moment to talk to us, and we're awfully glad to see you on the ground safely.
Okay. Thank you, Tom.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Wait. Okay, great. Oh, and he's up.
There he is.
Perfect, great. David, just a quick clap, please.
Colonel Hague, David Curley, do you hear me?
Hi.
Yeah, David, I've got you loud and clear.
Not yet.
Hey,
put through yet.
are you getting audio from Nick Hague?
You just said something I didn't hear.
Yeah,
We're not getting audio.
We're not getting audio through the live.
I can hear you guys.
There we go. Oh, that far away.
Thank you.
Oh my God.
It's a big delay.
It looks like we have like I'm talking to you in space. It looks like an 8 or 9 second delay.
I tell you what, I wish I was talking to you from space.
Yeah, I can understand that, actually. We'll get going here.
Okay.
I really appreciate it.
Yep.
I don't have to say, station, how do you hear me? So, but I'm glad we got this going. Everybody happy? Hang on one second.
Spot. It was just one moment.
Well, it's actually turned cool here. You're missing the photographer I'm working with there, Nate and I both like to work on our cars, and they're like 3 weeks in the spring and 3 weeks in the fall when you can actually work on your car, not sweat. And we're in that second period right now. Finally changed. Okay, here we go.
Okay.
Astronaut Colonel Nick Hague, who had quite the amazing ride, joins us from Houston. Thank you, sir, for joining us. You look no worse for the wear.
Well, thank you. Glad to be with you. Yeah, I'm actually feeling great. All things considered, walked away unscathed, and I'm extremely thankful for that.
Well, there were dramatic pictures and the story of what actually happened to you and your cosmonaut partner in the Soyuz. We got a sense from NASA. They said you saw the light, but did you feel something that was wrong at separation from the first stage to the second stage? What was your first indication?
Yeah. So the automated response from the rescue system that takes us away from the rocket is so fast that our first indication was the violent side-to-side motion and then being thrusted away from the rocket. That was our indication that something was not quite right. And in the middle of all of that, we have the alarm and the light that's flashing inside the capsule saying that we've had an emergency with the rocket or a booster failure. It's at that point, as I'm trying to maintain visual on that, and we're being tossed around a little bit in our straps, that blurry vision of seeing the light where it said booster failure, that was the point where I realized, hey, we're not going to make it to orbit today.
Talk about being slapped around a little bit inside that Soyuz. Those were pretty striking pictures for those of us on the ground. What did it feel like?
It was one bumpy roller coaster ride. A lot of side-to-side motion being tossed around, but it was over almost before it started. And at that point, we switched into a different set of procedures, knowing that our mission, prime mission at that point, was to get back down on the ground safe. And so we started doing the things we needed to do to make that happen.
I don't think a lot of people understand what they were seeing. When we see those pictures inside the capsule, what were we actually seeing happening to you and your colleague?
Yeah, so I've seen that, and so I think what you're seeing is the first frame or two before the feed cuts from the capsule of us being shaken side to side. It continued for a little while after that before it settled out, and then it was kind of a slow coasting ride to the top of our ballistic trajectory. The other thing that you don't necessarily see in there are the G's that you feel as you're being accelerated away from the booster. It's a fairly high G load, but it's a fairly brief period of time.
Yeah, I think that a lot of folks didn't realize that that's you actually getting clear of the malfunctioning booster.
Yeah, that's the response time for that system is unbelievably fast. As soon as it senses anything wrong with the booster, it's trying to get us out of there as quick as possible. And that's the system that saved our lives. And Alexei and I are standing because of that. So I've got to send out a huge thanks to the people that work on that system. It's on every rocket, and for manned launches on the Soyuz, they haven't had to use that system for 35 years. But it's always been there, and it's always been ready, and we proved that last week. So I've got a huge amount of gratitude for all the people that work at the Samara Rocket Company and all the hard work that they put into making sure that it's always ready for us.
Let's talk about this. We see your violent abort escape from the booster. You're only halfway to space, so you continue to move to a certain point, and then gravity comes in, and you call it a ballistic re-entry. What happened when you reach that apex and you start falling back to Earth?
Yeah, so it's ballistic because we're not trying to fly anything. So it's like tossing a ball high into the air. At some point, gravity takes over and starts bringing it back down. And once we separated from the rocket, it was just a matter of time before we started falling back down. So there were a couple things that happened at the top. I got to experience a few seconds of weightlessness, and I was able to watch a few things float around in the capsule. Our zero-G indicators that we had hanging with us were floating around. I was also able to look out the window, primarily to make sure, hey, are we in a good attitude? Are we stable? Are we ready to come back down? But also look out the window and realize, looking down at the curvature of the Earth and out into the blackness of space and realizing I got close, but it wasn't going to be this time.
What happened? You landed. Everybody thought, "Oh my gosh, a ballistic." Everyone thinks a ballistic return, but the parachute's deployed, and it's a landing like any other Soyuz capsule.
Absolutely. The idea of the ballistic return is just it's everything that gets you to the point where the chutes are going to open. And so ballistic just means that we're coming down on a fairly steep trajectory, and so the G loads that we're going to experience are going to be higher than you normally would. Ours were just about 7 Gs. On a normal reentry, you might have 5 Gs. So we weren't that much higher in terms of the G load that we had to experience than a normal reentry. In those regards, based on where the emergency occurred, we were pretty lucky.
But you're disappointed I'm not speaking to you in space.
Absolutely. I've been here at NASA 5 years. I've spent 2 years dedicated to training for the mission on orbit. I was supposed to be doing a spacewalk 2 days from now. All of those things are things that I was very much looking forward to do. But life doesn't always give you a vote how it turns out. So I can tell you that I feel great now, and that when NASA wants me to fly, I'm ready to go.
And you don't know when that is yet? It's back in the queue for you?
Yeah, I have no clue. The programs, those decisions are pretty complicated. I I let them know that I'm feeling great and I'm ready to go.
Let's talk about the fact that we don't have a way to get to the space station right now. I know that's not something that you get to decide, but you must be thinking about your crewmates up there in the station.
Absolutely. We're in this together. It's a very human endeavor, and there's a lot of risk associated with what we're doing, and I think we all realize that. So we work tirelessly, and I say we, it's the thousands of people on the ground that work tirelessly to make sure that we're trying to protect and keep our crews as safe as possible. And I have complete faith in not only the NASA team, but the international team that's working together to make that happen for our guys on orbit.
Hey, Nick, Bill Harwood, CBS News at the Cape. Appreciate you doing this, and since time is so short, I'm just going to jump right in. I was wondering if you could describe the experience. I mean, what it felt like on board just before and after that abort kicked in. I mean, we saw a frame or two of video, and it looked like a pretty good shaking.
Yeah, Bill. It was pretty aggressive, but it was pretty fleeting. As the abort system kicked into place and pulled us away from the rocket, it was a fairly aggressive side-to-side motion, and we were also being pushed back into our seats by the acceleration. But it didn't take too long for all of that to play out, and then we were just coasting to the apex of our trajectory, which gave us a few seconds to collect ourselves, get into our procedures, and start making the decisions that we needed to make. On the way down, the G loads were higher. They were more elevated, about 7 Gs coming back in on our ballistic trajectory. A normal re-entry, you might experience 4 or 5 Gs, so it's not that much more. So it wasn't too uncomfortable to get through those Gs. And then after that, it was a normal landing.
I know the Russians focus a lot of their training on malfunctions and abort procedures. You told me that before launch. I mean, just like NASA does or used to do with the shuttle. Was there anything about the abort that surprised you that maybe didn't go the same way you thought training would?
I really felt prepared with all of the training that we had received. We'd actually run some scenarios where we had a booster failure and our response to that. Obviously, this is my first flight, and so every sensation was new for me. And so those are the things that are surprising. Even if it's a nominal parachute opening, the way that the capsule swings side to side, or even if it's a nominal landing like we had in terms of the capsule touching down on the ground, those are all sensations that we don't get to simulate. Those feelings of being bounced around and thrown around inside the capsule.
on a personal level, I mean, I know you're an Air Force, 20-year veteran of the Air Force, test pilot school and all that, but was there ever a moment during all of this when maybe in the back of your mind you were thinking, hey, maybe this won't turn out okay? I'm not asking if you got scared, but there had to be some pretty frightful moments in that.
Yeah, I think what kicks in is the training, right? We just talked about that. And the training, that, I've spent my Air Force career in high-stress situations, and this isn't the first emergency that I've been a part of in flight. You realize that the training is there to keep you safe. And the thing that I can do to help get us down on the ground as safe as possible is try to stay as calm and as focused as I can and do the things that I need to do to make us be successful. So as soon as we saw the booster failure light and Alexei and I transitioned into we're going to perform a landing, we just started executing the procedures like we had done dozens of times before, and tried to be as precise and accurate with everything that we were doing as we could. We knew that is the best way to give us the best chance of success.
Well, how did your wife feel about all this? I saw you guys at the airport. I mean, I know she's a 20-year Air Force veteran herself, but you had two of your young kids were at the launch. I'm just wondering how they reacted to all this and what they might be thinking about you doing this again down the road.
Yeah, so my wife is amazing, and it's not her first time. So she's a public affairs officer, and we first started all of this back at Edwards. She was the public affairs officer for the test center. I'd be out flying test missions. She had a radio in her office where she'd listen to any of the in-flight emergencies from any of the flights that were happening at Edwards. So she's had practice at hearing that, hey, my flight's not going well, and kind of managing the emotions. I got to tell you that when we finally got to hug each other coming down off the plane, it was a bit of a release for both of us, the emotions that we'd been kind of holding back just to stay focused on the situation. As for the boys, my youngest, God bless him, he looks at me and he goes, Dad, when are you going back to space? So I think that everybody realizes what we do is difficult and that there's risk involved, and it's important to understand that it's worth the risk. What we're doing up there in the space station, what we're doing for human exploration, it's for the benefit of all, and it's important that we continue to make those steps.
Do you have any idea when you might get a second chance to fly, and do you have any second thoughts about the Soyuz, given your experience last week?
Yeah, so in terms of a next flight, I don't have a clue as to what's in store for me, but I can say that I'm ready to go 100%. In terms of whether I have second thoughts about the Soyuz, this has only helped to solidify my appreciation for how robust that system is. There is a launch abort system that protects me continuously from about an hour before launch until I'm in orbit. And at any moment in there, we could have a failure and it's going to protect me. That system hadn't been tested in 35 years, but we tested it last week and it's ready. And so that's a testament to the commitment and the perseverance and the attention to detail that the constructors, the workers, everybody that's involved with the Soyuz rocket and the Soyuz spacecraft, that's a testament to them.
Yeah, I understand that, but this abort comes right on the heels of a leak in a Soyuz that's currently docked to the station that was at best an indicator of a quality control issue. I mean, I was wondering if you feel like there's a coincidence involved here, or should NASA be concerned with how the Russians are preparing their spacecraft?
Right. The Russians, Roscosmos, has launched an investigation looking into this as well as the other incident, and I have no reason to doubt their ability to find solutions to these problems, find the cause of these problems, and fix them for the future. I've got complete confidence in them being able to deliver.
Well, listen, thanks. I've got one last question. I mean, you trained for years to go on this flight to the station, and now it's kind of on hold indefinitely. That's got to be tough to swallow. I was just wondering how disappointed you were that you got so close to space, but you didn't quite get there this time.
Yeah, there was a point where we got to the apex of our trajectory, and I looked out the window, and I saw the curve of the Earth out there and the blackness of space, and it was a bittersweet, fleeting moment, knowing that I got that close, but that it wasn't going to work out that time. What can you do? Sometimes you don't get a vote, and so this time we'll roll with the punches, and you just try to celebrate the little gifts that you get, like walking the boys to school this morning. So.
Hey, I'm sorry. That's great, Nick. Thank you very much. I'm out of time. I hope next time we chat, you're up in orbit.
Sounds good. Thanks, Bill.
Take care.
Colonel Hague, this is Marcia Dunn at the AP at the Kennedy Space Center. Good to see you, looking well. I'm just get right into it because we don't have too much time, but there, I know things happen quickly. All of a sudden, 2 minutes into flight, lights are flashing, alarms are going off. How alarming was it for you personally? And I know you're trained, but, was there any sense of I don't know, you must have been a little bit scared. Help us understand how it was for you.
Yeah, so like you said, the first 2 minutes of launch, everything was going smoothly. And then all of a sudden...
I cannot hear his answer in my phone.
And then all of a sudden, we had...
I'm not hearing his answer in my phone. I got nothing coming over my phone.
Are we good to keep going?
Hi, can you hear me?
I've got you loud.
This is the interview line, Marcia AP.
Marcia, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I could
Okay.
not hear his answer.
Okay, Marcia, this is Nick Hague.
Oh, I hear you now loud and clear. Yes,
Okay.
just tell me any sense of momentary panic, fright, alarm. Tell me what was going through your head. The rest of us were mighty scared.
Yeah. So, I got to tell you, the first 2 minutes, it was a smooth ride, and it was everything I expected. And then after that 2 minute point, when the emergency hit, we were fairly quickly and a little violently removed from the rocket by the launch safety system. And so it was surprising. You look up, you're a little bit startled, and then I saw the booster failure light inside the capsule. And at that point, I realized, hey, we're not going to make it to orbit today. And your training kicks in, and you're ready to respond. And so Alexei and I changed gears, and we were focused on getting down on the ground as safely as we could.
Well, even the NASA administrator was pleasantly amazed to hear you speaking Russian. I mean, here you are in an emergency. Was it hard to get those Russian words in your mind and out your mouth, or how was that? And what were you saying with Alexei? Was he reassuring you that were you two even conversing amongst the two of you?
Yeah, we're a crew. And so I've spent 2 years over in Russia working side by side with Alexei, and during all of that training, all we're speaking is Russian. So it would have been a little weird had I broken into English, because all of my instincts and reflexes inside the capsule are to speak Russian. Alexei, I'm thankful I've got a commander like Alexei. He is calm. He stabilizes any situation, and so it was very easy to work with him and just transition into those procedures. And then we just started doing what we did every day in the simulator when they'd throw emergencies at us. We knew that if we wanted to be successful, we needed to stay calm, and we needed to execute the procedures in front of us as smoothly and efficiently as we could.
Well, that's a long time, 34 minutes from the time the abort occurred to touchdown. Was there much for you to do? I know it's mostly automated, so, I don't know, were you praying during this time? Were you, how, besides looking out the window to assess the terrain, what are you thinking, and what are you doing, really?
Yeah, so there's a whole series of events that we monitor as we are on our way back down, and so after the system removed us from the rocket, we were kind of on this ballistic trajectory, and so we coasted up. You have the ability to look out. It's more than just looking out the window and assessing the terrain. It's looking out the window and making sure, okay, what kind of orientation are we in? Is the system responding right? Alexei had to put us into a ballistic descent mode, and then we had to maneuver some valves and get things in the right configuration. And then it's preparing yourself for landing. We knew that coming down, because we were in a ballistic descent, we needed to be prepared to endure the 7 Gs that we were going to experience. We need to be ready for the opening shock of the chutes and make sure all of our gear was in place. And then we have to work with the rescue teams, communicating with them on the way down, and then also post-flight to make sure that they can get to us as fast as they can. So 34 minutes may seem like a long time, but I can tell you it seemed like a pretty quick instant from the time that the emergency happened until the time that I was landed in the capsule looking out my window at the ground and the gravel that was next to me. It went pretty quick.
Now, what did the two of you say to each other when you realized you made it through this ordeal?
We looked at each other. We had grins from ears to ears. You can imagine the scene. We're in the capsule. We're kind of hanging upside down from our straps because of the orientation of the capsule. And we look at each other, big grins. He holds out a hand. I shake his hand. And then we start cracking a few jokes between us about how short our flight was.
Well, you're the only American to have gone through a launch abort like this. How are your NASA colleagues, your fellow NASA astronauts? Sounds to me like you've got some bragging rights now. Tell me about this.
Okay, so I have to admit, I wasn't shooting to make myself famous because of a launch abort. And if I could trade places right now, I'd love to be on the space station prepping for an EVA in 2 days.
Well, I heard you say that you've had some other, episodes you've had to deal with in the Air Force, but this surely must have been your closest call.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime you're launching yourself into space and your booster has a problem when you're going, 1,800 meters per second. Things are pretty dynamic and they happen pretty fast. So I've got to, I'd be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to give my thanks to all the people that dedicate themselves to making sure that launch abort system is ready to go every time we launch. It protects us from before launch all the way until we're on orbit, and they proved last week that it was ready when we needed it. It's been a long time since we've needed it, but it was ready at that critical moment.
And I know you don't sound like you have any second thoughts about riding a Soyuz again, but what about your wife, your sons, and your parents, too, who were standing there watching all this happen?
So I think a lot of people have seen the picture of me coming down the steps off the plane when we finally got back to Baikonur, and I was able to give my wife a hug. And, a lot of those emotions come up about, make you realize just how fortunate I was to be there. And I was, so thankful to be able to give her a hug. And she looked up to me and she said, "Don't worry, you're going to get there." It's a sacrifice by more than just, the individual that's riding the rocket. The family, the friends, everybody sacrifices in order to make that possibility happen. And they know how much it means. It means a lot to them too. And so I think I can say safely that collectively we're ready for another flight.
Well, glad.
Hey, Colonel Hague, it's Chris Davenport from the Washington Post. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, so you're a test pilot, flew F-16s, F-15s. I'm just sort of curious, up until the Soyuz flight, had you had any, or let me ask it this way, what was your exciting moment up until this point, the most harrowing moment you ever had in the cockpit before the Soyuz flight?
Yeah, so I mean, I've got lots of experience, and they're all unique. There's been in-flight emergencies back in working at Edwards, doing flight tests, whether I was going through test pilot school or there accomplishing missions. But probably the most harrowing is just flying combat missions over Iraq. There were some interesting situations there. So it's not the first high pressure situation that I've been in. I think that's probably something that my background has helped prepare me for this moment.
Cool. Is there a specific story you could tell us about one of those missions?
It's nothing more glamorous than we're flying low and slow, and people are taking hostile action at us. It just brings things into sharp clarity about your priorities in life and why you're doing what you're doing.
And did you at any point in the Soyuz wish you could fly it? You could just take over the controls and land that puppy yourself?
And I tell you what, the Soyuz is an engineering marvel. To watch us, think back and kind of piece together all of the images that I've got swirling around in my head from this flight. The instant where the launch system, the launch escape system, ripped us from the rocket, to the way that the Soyuz responded and got us back down to the ground safely. That thing is reliable, and I'm just glad that there are so many people that have invested so many years of their life making that system as strong as it is.
And as part of your training, I'm sure, and I think you had mentioned this earlier, that an abort scenario comes up, and it's something that you train for, you're prepared for. I was curious how you train for it. Is there a simulator? Do you is there anything where you can experience those side-to-side vibrations you were talking about and the elevated Gs? Or is it something you just sort of talk about in a classroom setting? How do you prepare for that?
So you can't prepare for it in a simulation where it's all put together. So the first time that you can put it all together is when you're in flight. But we do different aspects of it at different times. So we do centrifuge training, where we fly a profile that shows us what a nominal launch and a nominal reentry would be, so that we can practice feeling those Gs and practice breathing, so that we can maintain good focus during those times. So I've been in the centrifuge. I've felt what 6, 7 Gs feels like. They take us all the way up to 8 Gs when we're doing the training. Then, the other aspect is we are in a capsule that looks just like the real thing. It's actually old parts that they've scavenged from previous vehicles. And so when you're sitting in there and the simulations and the emergencies are going off and the alarms are sounding and you're making all the switch throws, it feels just like you're there. And that was one of the comments I had to Alexei when we were sitting there before launch, is this feels just like the simulator. So it's a very comfortable feeling because you've spent so many hours inside there. You know where every switch is at by memory. You really don't have to look to be able to find what you're after.
So I know you've been at NASA for about 5 years and training ever since then, but I'm sort of curious, how far this goes back for you, how long you wanted to be an astronaut and how long you've been hoping and dreaming of getting to space.
I can remember since I was a little kid back in Kansas looking up in the night sky that I was interested in exploring out there. That's the childhood dream. It probably started to really solidify for me when I went to test pilot school during my time in the Air Force early on. Got out there and realized that working with really complicated machines and the types of teams that we develop when we're doing flight tests. They're very small, intimate teams, and you depend on each other to make the right calculations and to execute properly. And you depend on each other to mitigate all the risks that you're exposing yourself to keep everyone safe. And that type of work, that type of problem-solving work in a team was something that I really enjoyed. And I saw that same type of work here at NASA, and then I realized that, hey, becoming an astronaut was a professional ambition. And so that was 20 years ago almost.
So I wonder, Marcia kind of asked this, but I want to in some ways try again. Just I'm curious if you've had time to talk with your fellow astronauts back there at JSC. I know it's sort of not just a band of brothers, but brothers and sisters, all sort of very close. I'm curious how they've received you. Any jokes, any ribbing, any heartfelt welcomes. What has that been? What it's been like to be back home with them?
Yeah, no, it runs the gamut, right? So you get hugs, you get jokes about, hey, you're going to have to try harder next time. Some people it just takes a couple times. It is a band of brothers. It's a community. We all are out there, putting our rears in the seat and taking that big jump. And we realize it's a tough business. But we also realize that there are teams spread across the globe, that are invested in keeping us safe. Everybody's invested in making sure that the mission is going to be successful and that we're going to stay safe. And they're doing everything they can, whether that's the Soyuz rocket or the Soyuz spacecraft, or it's the team of thousands that are operating the space station. We're all in this trying to be successful and trying to keep the crew safe. And so you feel that special connection when you come back into the office, and it's lots of big hugs, and everybody's just relieved that you're still here.
Great. Thanks so much for your time, sir.
No, thank you. Glad to be with you.
Okay, great. Hey, Nick, Alex Stuckey with the Houston Chronicle. How are you?
I'm doing good, Alex. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for taking time to answer this barrage of questions. I'm going to try not to repeat any of the questions you've already been asked, but I can't promise anything.
Okay.
So, I guess what my biggest thing, the first thing when I saw you guys coming back down and, you know, that the Soyuz didn't explode or anything like that was, you know, how bummed you must be that, you know, you didn't quite make it. And I know you've talked a little bit about this in previous interviews, but I mean, once you got back down to the ground, I mean, what was your first thought in terms of, you know, we're not sure when you'll be able to go back up, and you know, you were so close and didn't quite make it.
Yeah, you know, so the first moment that I was able to take a deep breath in this whole ordeal was after we came kind of to a skidding stop in our capsule, and my window was about 12 inches from the dirt that was outside. And, you know, I was able to look through that and just take just breathe in and take a moment and you know, realize just how lucky we were. And maybe lucky is not the right word. I think fortunate is the right word. Because as I've mentioned before, there are just thousands of people that are working tirelessly to put the systems in place, those very systems that saved us last Thursday. And I'm just thankful that they do their job and they take it so seriously, and that system was ready to go when we needed it. So that helps temper the disappointment of not being on station right now. I got to tell you, I'd much rather be there doing what I've been training to do, but I'm super thankful that I'm you know, alive and kicking today, and that I'll have another opportunity in the future.
Mm-hmm. Now, when our last couple of major accidents, obviously yours was not quite that bad since we're talking, but have really set back, you know, the astronaut program. You know, you think Columbia, we were out of commission for 2 years. Are you concerned that something like that might happen here, that even if Russia finds, you know, really pinpoints the issue and fixes it, that NASA will be hesitant to put our astronauts on board? Is that anything you're thinking about right now?
Yeah, so, you know, I want to make sure that people take the time they need to fully address the problem, and I have, you know, absolute confidence in the Russians to conduct the investigations that they have open, to come to conclusions and put the corrections in place. In terms of, you know, how much faith do I have in them? I have complete faith in them. You know, an aside, they all are deeply committed to making sure that the crew is safe. You know, I was flying back into Star City after the landing in Baikonur and coming back. I hadn't planned to come back that way. I wasn't prepared. I didn't have the right clothes. It started to get cold in Moscow already. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I flew back with Dmitry Rogozin, who's the head of Roscosmos. He saw that, hey, it's cold outside and Nick doesn't have a jacket. And so he gave me the jacket off his back. So they are committed to making sure that we're staying healthy and that we're safe. And I have no reason at all to ever doubt that.
Mm-hmm. I guess in kind of going along with that, it sounds like you're not really concerned about us relying on the Russians, you know, especially this coming right after the hole was discovered and the other Soyuz on board.
Yeah, you know, so I'm not concerned with the Soyuz. Obviously, I'm very interested in what's developing with commercial crew and getting that there, and I've mentioned that before in previous interviews. It provides us as a program with a robust means to get astronauts and cosmonauts to the space station, so that if we have a problem with one vehicle, we can still deliver on time and not have to do the types of things that we might need to do if we've got delays with one particular vehicle. So I'm excited to see that progress continue, but I'm also very confident in the Soyuz to be able to continue to deliver crew members to the station.
Okay, and then I guess my last question is, what did you do when you came back to Houston? Because it was Saturday, right? What does your week look like so far?
Yeah, so I've been told to take some time off and spend it with the family. Obviously, we've got a lot to work through as a family, and we've had lots of good discussions with my boys and my wife. And next week, I'll look for further assignment from the office on what they want me to do in the near term. So it's good to be back in Houston. The weather started to change, so it's nice and cool, and I've enjoyed a couple nice long runs in the morning these past couple days.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yep.
Hi, Nick. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to everyone joining us on Facebook Live. First, I want to say you have people from all over the world watching right now and sending their well wishes, and everyone is extremely grateful and just expressing their thankfulness that you and Alexei were able to return safe. So we're taking a few questions live, and we'll start from the very beginning. When did you realize something was wrong?
Yeah. No, and Leah, I'd like to say thanks for all the well wishes that have come in. The level of support from everybody across the globe has been amazing in such a time, and so thank you to everybody out there. So back to the question, when did we first know that something was wrong? It was 2 minutes into the launch, and everything was going per plan. It was a smooth ride, and right around first stage separation, everything went a little awry, and so we were tossed back and forth inside the capsule a little bit, and then thrusted away from the rocket as soon as the launch abort system had recognized there was a problem with the booster. So the first moment that I recognized something was as we were being ripped away from the rocket. We had an alarm inside the capsule, and we had an emergency light come on that said that we had a problem with the booster, and it was at that moment it was a pretty crystal clear realization that we weren't going to make it to orbit that day.
Wow. And so speaking of making it to orbit, do you know or have any idea of when you might launch back to the space station?
Yeah, so I really don't have any clue. I got to say that I feel really fortunate to be able to walk away from an incident like that with barely a bump or a bruise. I feel in good shape, and I'm ready to get back in it. So, I'm here and ready to go when I'm called upon.
We have a great question from Anna in Colombia, and she would like to know how you're trained for facing these kind of psychological issues and keeping cool and not panicking whenever something goes awry.
Right. So I've got to think my career in the Air Force has done a lot to help me prepare for stressful situations like this, whether it's through deployments or my time in flight test, where we've had to deal with failures in aircraft that you're in and having to get down on the ground immediately. So those have been stressful situations. In terms of managing that, you really end up falling back to your training. You learn over time. Over my 2 decades in the Air Force, I've learned that in those situations, the best thing that you can do is stay calm and do what you've been trained to do. And so we train endlessly to address those types of situations. I've spent the better part of the last 2 years in Star City, Russia, inside a descent module where they have thrown every failure imaginable at us. And Alexei and I have developed the team cohesion that we need to be able to respond to those failures. And we put that to work when when that was thrown our way on Thursday.
So you've mentioned a little bit that as soon as something went wrong, you automatically move into training mode and you go back to everything that you've learned. Aside from that, was your initial reaction fear or disappointment?
I just remember it being this very poignant realization that, wow, we just had a failure of the booster. So there's a little bit of disbelief because it hasn't happened in 35 years. So that was a little surprising. But we just had a failure of the booster, and okay, now we got to get home. And so we just instantly transitioned into executing the procedures that we had practiced before, and trying to make sure that we did them as precise and as effectively as we could.
And while in the Soyuz, upon your descent, did you feel any temperature or pressure changes?
Yes, so when we come back, there are pressure changes. So after the main chute opens, there is a valve that helps equalize us with the outside ambient air pressure, and so you feel pressure changes in your ear on descent, just like you might feel in a commercial airliner coming in for landing. Other than that, there was no extreme temperatures, and if you look at pictures of our capsule laying on the steppes of Kazakhstan, you realize that we weren't going fast enough for anything to char or to have any of the plasma that you would normally have from a re-entry. We were going slow enough, our energy was low enough that it was really just aerodynamic drag that slowed us down.
Wow, thank you. So Tony would like to know if this incident will keep you away from any flights, or does it make you more determined to go up in the future?
Yeah, so in terms of determination, personal perseverance, I'm ready to go, and I look forward to the next opportunity. We collectively, my family, all of my friends, extended family, everybody has invested and sacrificed a lot to make this opportunity happen. And we all realize that it's a very hard business that we are a part of. You're not always going to be successful, but you've got to persevere, because what we're trying to accomplish with human exploration of space, the things that we're trying to discover, the expanding the boundaries of human understanding, that's what we're trying to do, and it's worth it. And so yes, I'm ready to go.
That's great. So Lou would like to know if you've had a chance to speak to the current orbiting crew and explain why you're going to be late.
So we actually had to stay in a hospital in Baikonur overnight for observation. And I'm laying there in the hospital bed, and I get a phone call from Alex and Serena on board. And they were giving me a hard time, saying that they were eating my dinner that they had prepared for me and had waiting for me. But we joked around a little bit, and they're in a situation up there that they didn't expect to be in, being up there short a few crewmates, and it's going to make life more challenging for them over the next few months. But there's a team on the ground of thousands that are making it possible and arranging things to give them the support that they need. So they're going to be great.
We have one last question from Deanna, and she would like to know what you will take from this experience that you can use for the future, both for personal experience and for sharing information with other astronauts and cosmonauts.
Yeah, absolutely. I just yesterday we tried to capture as much as we can, and I've given a statement so that we can get all of the insight from my experience and try to propagate that towards other crew members so that they can learn from my experience. That's important. Personally, I feel like this is just another event that has happened that is going to help shape me and make me a more effective crew member in the future. I know that Alexei and I as a crew, we've experienced this together, and that's only going to make us a stronger crew in the future.
Well, we're looking forward to when you do join that crew in the future, and we can't wait to see you fly again. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone for tuning in on Facebook Live.
Thank you. My pleasure.